A brand new Tinto Maps has been released and we have the fullest extent with all of the maps of the French region. So today I'm going to be presenting this particular part of the world for EU5, as well as I'm going to be discussing more in depth about the 100 Years War and how exactly it's going to be portrayed in Project Caesar, as well as the phases that it had, because it wasn't just a continuous war, it was actually a few separate wars tied up together, which we call the 100 Years War today, starting in 1337, the first phase being actually between 1337 and 1360, with the war between the French and the English subsiding for a short period, and then in 1369 the second phase started with the war relaunching between the English and the French. Now I also want to address the fact that I've got a little bit of my face swollen up here, and I haven't released this video immediately after the Tinto Maps was released because I had a little bit of a surgery. I had to remove one of my wisdom teeth, and for 3 days I barely could speak. I'm still in pretty serious pain when I'm speaking now. Like, just talking is actually painful. Between me and you guys, if we really want to think about it, the 100 Years War was really 150 Years War, or even longer from certain perspectives, because even before 1337 there was another war in 1324, namely the War of Saint Sardo, in which the English also had an argument about the lands to the south in Guyane. So then what are we going to do here? We're going to start 1324, 1337. Technically it's 1337 from a historical perspective, so we're going to go with that, but just saying, the English and the French had been fighting for a really long time, even beforehand. Pavia once more makes us really excited with the maps he's bringing today, a massive amount of maps, extra maps compared to before, and we have a very thorough analysis of the French region. It also mentions that because of the great amount of feedback received on Iberia, they started to rework the map, as well as the Low Countries as well, and they're going to be showing that soon as well with the rework. So we have a little bit of the rework here. We see Flanders is one of the vassals of the French, or Appanages, or whatever they might be called. Reality is that Flanders was indeed a subject of France. However, this is a big however, despite the fact that the Flemish crown remained loyal to the French at the start of the 100 Years War in 1337, because of revolts that happened because of the English embargoing the Flemish, and the Flemish not being able to get the raw materials they needed from the English to process into whatever they were processing, mostly cloth and so on, various clothing attires and so on, because everybody knows Flanders is famous for cloth in the time period. In any case, this massive embargo the English imposed on the Flemish led to massive revolts by the Flemish, and eventually the Flemish decided to join the English against the French. And during the start of the war, but pretty much from the beginning of the war, the first year of the war anyway, the Flemish fought on the English side against the French in what is technically known as the Edwardian War, or the first phase of the 100 Years War, since during this initial phase the English were led by Edward III of England. The whole conflict started essentially because Edward believed that he should be the rightful king of the French, or better yet, should be the king of France, because his mom was the sister of the previous French king and the last monarch of the Carpet dynasty, namely Charles IV. He was the monarch of France and Navarre for that matter. Meanwhile, Philip VI was the first one of the Valois, and disagreed with Edward's claim to being the leader of to being the king of France. At the same time, he wanted the Duchy of Aquitaine, which was of course Edward's duchy, to be subservient, and he wanted them to pay homage to the French crown. So technically, as it was with most of the medieval politics, you could be king of a country but duke or count of another country, and as count or duke of that particular country you would be paying your homage or your tribute to whatever king served in that particular area and that particular county or duchy was a part of. So in this case, the French king wanted Aquitaine to be a part of the French crown, with whoever was the Duke of Aquitaine, in our case that would have been also the King of England, to pay him homage as Duke of Aquitaine. And as you can imagine, that didn't really stick well with the English. This was pretty tough actually, because the French were very confident in their success. The reality is that the French got their asses kicked in the Edwardian part of the war. In fact, by the end, the king, well, after Philip VI passed away, the next king, John II of France, who continued the war of course against the English, lost the war. He was captured at the Battle of Poitiers, and afterwards him alongside a lot of other French dukes were prisoners in England for quite a while actually. And as they were prisoners in England, John II of France was made to sign a peace treaty, namely the Treaty of Bretigny, and then after Treaty of Calais, if I'm not mistaken, it was ratified at Calais afterwards. And that treaty gave the English crown massive swathes of land in the south of France. In fact, like almost half of France was given to the... I think I have a map about that. Let me check. Yeah, so this is France after the Treaty of Bretigny. As you can see here, the English got a huge amount of France, pretty much the entirety of Avignon and Guyane. This is how 1360 ended the war, and then in 1369 the war restarted, and the French tried to get back these lands with not the best results. So that's why I'm curious how they're gonna do this, because if they keep Flanders as a vassal of the French, they should have an event, because I did that whole rant because of Flanders, in case you're wondering. They should have an event that flips over the Flemish on the English side, right? Because it doesn't make any sense for the Flemish to fight on the French side, since historically they didn't really. I mean, they pledged loyalty, but then afterward basically fought on the English side the whole time in the Edwardian War. When portraying the political situation of France in 1337, we have a few options. On one extreme, we could make it a centralized monarchy like England or the Iberian one, but with a much lower degree of control over its territories. Conversely, we also thought about making the French crown an international organization similar to the HRE. That would be cancerous. I'm glad they did not go for that option. That would be the worst, honestly. We decided to go with the middle terms, which represents the French crown lands with the country of France and its networks of appanages and vassals as different subjects. That's a great way of portraying it. Basically like it is in EU4 right now. We think that this way we can portray the progressive centralization of the crown under the reigns of Philip II, Louis IX, and Philip IV, whilst also portraying the powerful jurisdictional powers of the French feuds. We have two types of subjects in France by the way of vassals, which represents the regular fief, mouvants, and appanages, which were the fiefs granted to members of the royal family that could eventually revert to the French crown. The appanages are going to be a special type of vassal, as they are in EU4. This is going to be something that's likely going to be a lot easier to integrate in EU5 than they are in EU4. Maybe similar to the system that we have for the Byzantines with the pronoias in EU4 as it stands right now. You may also notice that there might be a problem incoming related to a couple of English possessions in the mainland, the county of Ponthieu and especially Duchy of Aquitaine, as well as the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey, which comprise of dangerously close non-core locations of England. Yeah, so they decided to just flat out give these areas as direct holdings of the English crown rather than making them separate counties and duchies, because I'm assuming they just decided that there's way too many of those in the HRE as it stands. They didn't want to add a couple more small little entities in the north of France. I feel like that's probably a good idea though. Keeping the Duchy of Aquitaine as not directly owned by the English crown is a smart idea too though. Let's actually take a little bit of a closer look at the map itself before we continue with the next map. As you can tell, a lot of things here are very different from 1444. We have Valentinois over here in the south, as well as Viennois, two separate entities that don't even exist in EU4, but technically Viennois should. But anyway, aside from that, PS should be the Papal States. I'm assuming this would be the areas around Avignon that the Papal States had. Then you probably noticed here that in the Swiss lands, we don't have a unified Switzerland. We have the various Swiss cantons, or whatever they were called, with the Basel being probably the most famous of them, with the famous battle there and everything else, Lausanne and so on. Eventually they would merge after they got attacked by the Austrians, which led them to properly merge into the confederation that we have today. And the south, we also have Navarre as an independent kingdom. Like I said, just a few years prior to the start date, the king of France was also the king of Navarre, Charles IV of France, since he was the last of the Carpathian dynasty. Once he passed away, Navarre had a new leader. It was not the French king anymore, but I assume that there's going to be some type of flavor, maybe a mission, maybe a focus tree, whatever it's going to get called, that will allow you to get your union maybe, or control over Navarre again somehow. It would make sense. Of course, as we know now, this is the kingdom of Majorca that has these possessions here, and we have in the south also the little tiny Andorra. Franche-Comté is completely separate from Burgundy, by the way, and you're probably noticing here that there is no Burgundy. So that begs the question, where is the Duchy of Burgundy? That is actually a very good question that I saw some people asking, and you should know that the Duchy of Burgundy technically was not an independent country even in 1444. So we have Burgundy here. This is the Duchy of Burgundy in 1337. It is of course a subject of the French crown, just like in EU4. The Duchy of Burgundy, although not represented as such, it was not really its own country. It was the Duke of Burgundy Burgundy that owned land as Duke of Burgundy, subject of the French crown, and Count of Burgundy, subject of the Holy Roman Emperor, and via that also owned a lot of different other lands around the HRE, owned lands in the north and the Low Countries, owned Franche-Comté, owned Luxembourg and Hainaut and so on, right? That was lands that he owned, but he was still a subject of either HRE or the French crown, depending on which lands he owned. He did have a very high degree of autonomy, but he technically still had to pay homage to either two of those Chad lords. So yeah, that being said, I do expect Burgundy to have its own path towards becoming an independent and actual country, because even though the Duke of Burgundy still had to pay homage, historically speaking, Burgundy took the part of the English or the part of the French throughout the 100 Years' War, siding with either one of them, whichever it suit them best, because their ultimate goal kind of was to just get independence or to just get a higher degree of autonomy and not have to pay anybody any sort of homage, you know? I think Burgundy is also going to be one of the central themes of the French area, since it was probably the second strongest entity in the French area after France itself at the start of the campaign, if we don't include the English, of course. One more thing we have shown with this particular map is the official color as it stands right now of Austria, which is the gray/white that we have basically in EU4, adapted to the engine of EU5, of course. So a lot of things are staying basically the same color in EU5 as they are in EU4. Even Savoy is pretty much the same exact color. Saluzzo, for some reason, is a little bit changed though. They've got like a little bit of a purple going on for them, I guess. Yeah, this is pretty much purple, isn't it? Another big player in this area obviously is going to be Britain. Now, Brittany at the start of our game is going to be ruled by John III the Good, who was of the House of Dreux. He wanted, actually, when he passed away, and I think he passed away in 1341 or something like that, he wanted the Duchy of Burgundy to be directly owned by Philip VI of Valois, the King of France, right? He wanted the King of France to directly own the lands of Burgundy, of Brittany, which didn't cut it with the nobles. The nobles really didn't want that, so they decided to go with the other option, which was to give the Duchy of Brittany to Charles of Blois, who married, I think, the sister of John the Good. I'm not sure who, but he had some legitimate claim to the duchy, so that's why Brittany joined on the English side, fighting against the crown of France, because obviously they didn't want the French king to actually take possession of Brittany directly. That would have been pretty unbalanced for everybody in the region. So because of that, I do suspect that when the war starts in 1337, there's going to be certain events that are going to pull in the Bretons and the Flemish on the English side. Otherwise, it's going to be a very short war, and the English are going to lose because the French are going to be stronger. Flat out, just like that. Next up, we have the locations map mode, and I'm actually a little bit curious about this because I'm not 100% sure I understand what's going on here. Is it just me, or does the province of Paris have how many locations? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 42 no. One province with 42 locations. Oh wait, I just realized I'm a potato head. This is not the province map mode. This is just the locations, and that's the borders of the country itself. The locations you can see if you scroll in a little bit more, right? Ludi confirmed to be a poo-poo head. They changed this a little bit though. They definitely changed this a little bit. I think it's better for us to analyze the province map mode for a better understanding here. So Paris is actually very small. Paris only has 3 locations? What? 4 locations, that's it in the Paris province. That is really very few. The locations in France actually are really, really small. I mean, the province is not the locations. I think the biggest one would probably be like Perigord. Not even Perigord's got only 4 of them. All right, that's a different approach from what we've seen in Spain, where provinces had like 12 locations. Very big difference in France, apparently. Pavia says that we are aware we have several inconsistencies here, which is naming the province after locations instead of provincial or regional names. We're not very sure about what naming convention to use when we crafted this map, so we would be glad to receive feedback on the names that you think would fit. For example, Artois instead of Arras, Anjou instead of Angers, etc. Guys, you know what to do. Go to the comment section, especially if you're French or you know your French history from this particular time period. Do give your feedback. I believe the development team would really appreciate it. Especially go to the forums as well, would really help out a lot. Now we got also the terrain map mode. Most of the country is oceanic with a little bit of Mediterranean in the south and continental Arctic over in the Pyrenees. Voralis, and we have subtropical apparently in a few provinces. Looks like there's some subtropical over in the north of Italy as well for that map. What's really cool though is that we have a new type of coastline. We have the coastal ocean, which means that we're likely going to also have coastal seas, which would be different, I guess. We also have narrow something, probably narrow coast or narrow sea or something there. France, as you expect, is mostly just flatlands, which is the best for playing Toll, let's face it. We also have some hills and mountains in the south and around the Alps, of course. And if we go over to the last map mode, we do have mostly grassland. So we have flat grassland and farmlands and a tiny bit of woods, forests, and the hills and mountains. France is likely going to be the best area to be playing Toll. That is a guarantee. There's a reason why the French were always the strongest nation in Europe through its history, right? Throughout its history. It's because they had a lot of food, right? Makes sense to think about it. Whilst others were struggling to find food to not starve, the French were just like, yo, we got all that food. Let's do something else with our time. Like, invade our neighbors. Pavia does say that they are aware of some issues, like changing the vegetation of landes to sparse instead of forest, but they would also like feedback on this particular terrain bit, friend. My personal opinion, if anybody would ask, is that there should be significantly more woods and forests. Because sure, grasslands and farmlands is definitely a staple of the French areas. But if we are to look at it from a historical perspective, most of France in 1300s would have still been forests and woods. It wouldn't have been as grasslands and farmlands intensive as it is today, right? Because the population was like 9 million in the entire area, so you wouldn't need to have that much grasslands / farmlands all across the country. And if we look at some topographical maps, for example, of Moldova in 1300s, not even in 1600s, which is 300 years later, almost 90% of Moldova was forests, which is wild. And it's not just in Moldova, it's just all over Europe. In the 1400s, you would have a lot more woods and forests, significantly more than what we have here. Now the question is, can you change that in the EU5? Because if you can change from grasslands to something else, then you should probably put more woods and forests at the start, and then you can change it to grasslands or farmlands as you advance. But if you cannot change it, then sure, leave it as grasslands or farmlands from the start then. Now everybody's favorite bit, the cultures map mode. Pavia says that although there's two big cultural divisions of the French culture, Langue d'Oil and Languedoc, we think that their regional subdivisions would make the situation more accurate for 1337, where there's a long way until the cultural unification of France. I think that this is going to pose a lot more of a challenge for whoever plays as the French kingdom in the long term, because as we know already, culture is going to be significantly harder to actually convert in EU5 than it is in EU4. We don't know exactly how much more difficult, but it's going to be a lot more. In the words of Johan himself, probably going to take dozens of years, maybe hundreds of years, who's to say, right? So that being said, it would be more accurate in my opinion to keep it more divided as it is in this particular map mode. I'm not 100% sure how accurate it would be. I am slightly aware of some areas, like I do know that Norman, Francian, Burgundian, Provençal, Languedocian, Gascon, Limousin, these would be Arpitan as well. These would be accurate, right? This would make sense. I don't know some of the other ones, like Franche-Comtois, for example. Lorraine, probably, I guess. Breton, obviously. I don't know if Breton would be divided between Breton and Gallo, though. But then again, I'm not an expert in this particular area, right? However, as an EU4 player and somebody that loves culture converting shit, I think this is awesome, because this is going to be one of the main things that you're going to be focusing at the back of your head, you know, wiping out those different subcultures, making sure everybody's your preferred culture at the end of the day, right? And seeing as the French are going to be super strong in EU5, we already know that, giving them this as a sort of a, not necessarily debuff, but as a sort of something to do whilst you're also crushing everybody left and right, seems like a fun approach, and I agree with this. I like this. I think this is my favorite map out of all the maps released in today's Tinto maps, and I absolutely love it. In fact, I'm going to make love to this exact map right after I take my pain medicine, and let's just keep that between us, shall we? Some of the cultures that are really fascinating for me are Saintonge, Poitevin, Alpine. I hope that Germany has an equal amount of different cultures like this. I hope there's like 12 different cultures within the German group. Religion, as you would expect, everybody's Catholic, basically just like less than 1% Jewish people, as they say over here. They also mentioned they haven't portrayed any Catholic heresy. Maybe Cathars should still have some room in Languedoc, Mataillot, and Occitan village from 1294 1324. And now, boy, boys, it's time for the juice. It's time for the real juice. It's the raw goods juice, which of course goes hand in hand with the market map mode. And we have some new changes to the market map mode actually. We have Paris, Bordeaux, and we have Barcelona map. So parts of France are a part of Barcelona map. And now one of the changes we have is that the province, the location which has the market itself is highlighted. We have this little hash on the Paris, another one on Bordeaux itself, and another one here on, what is that, Cologne, I think, probably. So for the goods map mode, I'm not sure if there's any new goods. I haven't actually seen anything new. Pretty much the same stuff we saw with last week's Spain map. Nothing unusual. Maybe the addition of gems, because I haven't seen gems in the previous one, but that's something that we already have in EU4. Surprised to see there's very little wine compared to how much wine I would have expected France to have, right? And also we have two map modes for the population, namely we have the generic one here, and this is the map for whenever you click on the nation itself. So we have these provinces here. Green means more population, red means less population, kind of like with the development system in EU4 right now, because population is in essence exactly what's going to give you your economy and your manpower and everything else. We have the numbers here, 5.646 million in the French nation itself, like the French crown itself, whilst all the different appanages and vassals have their own amounts of population. 1.1 million in Brittany, 1 million in Normandy, 500,000 in Burgundy, 500,000 in Provence right next to me, 200,000 here, Auvergne 420,000, Savoy's got 550,000 as well, 450 in Aquitaine. Pretty high amounts of population all around the place. Flanders got 1 million by itself. Holy shit, that's a lot of people. Wow. Flemish people be fucking, y'all. We also have some of the numbers here. Austria's province here has 1.3 million. Is that just this province, or is it the entirety of Austria? Because I don't think the entirety of Austria would have only 1.3 million. Probably just that province, I'm assuming. A lot of other numbers in the Germanic area, but probably we're going to get bigger numbers as we progress. Trier's got 600,000. That's pretty significant. Next week, we're going to get a better look at Poland and the Baltic region. So that's going to be really hype for me. I'm extremely excited for that. It's probably one of my favorite parts of EU4. So it's definitely going to be one of my favorite parts in EU5. And we also got the Market Village building, which Johan posted this Saturday. It apparently gives nobles, possible nobles, clerics, burghers, peasant power plus 25% food capacity. So that's going to be a good thing to have in your province, right? To increase the capacity, lasts longer from a siege perspective, right? Merchant power 0.25, merchant capacity 0.25. That's pretty cool too. So it's basically like a building that a jack of all trades, kind of. Pretty low maintenance actually when it comes to needs, and production also not really expensive. So probably going to be one of the easier buildings to be constructing. It says this is a fun rural only building with 3 different options for the second production method slot. Okay, interesting. So yeah, this is going to be producing. You can turn raw iron into metal stuff, whatever they're called. Sand you can turn into gems, and wool you can turn into cloth, I guess, or fabric or something. Probably going to be spammed a buttload. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry if I wasn't super excited today. It's because of the tooth. It's not because of the dev diary. I'm actually super hyped, but whenever I speak too loudly and stuff, I die a little inside because of the pain. All right, boys, I'll see you in the next one. Love you all. Take care of yourselves.